Hey YouTube, another very overcast day in Pennsylvania. We're going to do a little bit of a check on the kiln here. I need to make sure that this wood is drying like it should be. I just want to check it all and see what kind of numbers I'm getting here now that there were a couple of days the sun did shine a little bit, for a couple minutes a day. Right now the temperature in there is around 48 degrees and it is about 26 or 24 outside. You can see there's some flakes falling. Now the side that I have open here, this was maple. It still is maple, but I mean it's maple that was sitting outside all summer last year, and the moisture content of it was about 19% for the longest time. So we're going to check and see what it is right now. So I'm starting about halfway down the pile. You're looking 11% there, 12%. 9%, and this is all maple. 11, 10%, 11%. This is pine, 2 pine boards that I put up here. It's 13%. Some red oak down at the bottom here, 9%. So the kiln has done very well holding its own, despite the cooler temperatures in here. I want to check some of this stuff on this side. This is cherry. Yeah, we'll go down near the bottom here. The cherry's around 10. 9. 12%. 8% for the hardwood part of the cherry, or the heartwood, 11%. So you can see that even though the temperature is not that warm and the relative humidity there is claiming to be really high, and it is probably that just because of the temperature is allowing for less moisture. The moisture is being compressed inside of the cold temperature, and that's why it's reading such a high relative humidity. But anyway, the lumber is still drying good. I have nothing to worry about here. I would say that as far as it going all the way down to 7% or 6%, which is where I would like it to be, I would say that it's probably going to hang in there around somewhere between 8 to 12. Until I can get some really warm temperatures in there. That's the biggest problem right now. So right at this point, I'm just maintaining what I've got here. So if you're, into building yourself a solar kiln, and however you build it, it doesn't have to be like this naturally, but however you build it, make sure you leave yourself room to get in at your wood, because otherwise you're just killing yourself trying to load it. But yeah, if you're into building a kiln for yourself, these do work very well. They're on the Virginia, I think it's Virginia Tech website. You can get some information on this thing, and they really work good. And as far as I'm concerned, it was well worth the effort. So again, you saw the numbers there, 8s, 9s, 10s, 12s. That's still very good for, wood. A little bit. If I was going to do anything inside with these, I'd put it inside the garage and leave it in there for 2 days, and it would probably be already down to what I would need it to be till I finish making furniture with it. But I'm not making furniture yet because I got too much other work to do up at the house, so I'm going to continue working on that. But this was just a check, and I thought you would want to check it and see what I'm doing with it. You see the temperature dropping a little bit there. I'm going to shut this thing. Hey YouTube. So, it's always something. This Simplicity tractor, which seemed to have been running so well, all of a sudden started crunching and grinding. and I took the bevel gearbox cover off, and there's a whole pile of metal filings in there, which I think are gear teeth. But anyway, I'm making this video just for myself, if nothing else. There was, on this adjustment for to get the thing to engage, I took one nut off of here. There's another nut and a spring. I want to see if I can't pull this pulleys off this shaft so I know what's holding this shaft. There was a keyway in here I took out. There was also a round ring. There it is right there. That was helping to hold on the pulleys. So at this point I'm just trying to see if this whole pulley mechanism will come off of here. I don't know if it will or not. So I don't know if you can see down into that gearbox too well. You can see there's a gear on this side. I don't think there's any on the other side, but there's like one in the front there, sort of like a pinion gear, and I think that's the one that's all messed up. So I got to take this apart and look at it. I can't tell anything from the way it is here. So the next thing I did was I took this bolt out of here that goes from the bottom of the tractor there onto this tab that's on like an angle. I don't know why it's on an angle, I guess to divert the belt to a different direction, but either way I need to get this pulley off of here, so I'm trying to see how that happens. From what I can tell, it looks like if I take this nut here off, I should be able to get that off of there. I'm not certain of that, but that's where I'm headed next. Okay, well here's the status. I had to take the weight and the tire off of this side in order to get this. It's kind of like a clutch type of thing. It turns like an old style clutch and a yoke, and it pushes the gear into a brake lining to make the gear spin. But that all had to come off that shaft, and I took 3 bolts, 1, 2, 3, out of the cover there, and it looks like it's coming loose. I have to take the little drive shaft off that comes back there to that bevel gearbox, and then on the opposite side there I need to take this pulley off of here. I'm going to take this cover off because I think I can get at the belt that drives that pulley on this side that I need to take off. So I'll take that off of there and then see what I can do with that belt, and then I want to get that pulley off the other side. It's not something like I'm used to working on, but nonetheless, you start taking bolts out and you'll find out what comes apart. Not sure if I'm doing this the right way yet, but this is how I'm going to do it. So, you live and learn. I want to take this off like I said and then go from there. I'll tell you what guys, you ought to try and get your stuff in as good a shape as you can get it, especially once you hit your early 60s, I would say, at least for my case. The best thing you can do is have stuff fixed up and treat it good so you don't have to be doing this kind of work. Right now my leg is killing me trying to work underneath this thing and work around it. But you know, it's just something that has to be done, so you do it. But what I'm saying is that's part of the reason why I bought this truck and leave it sit, so that when the time comes I don't have to do nothing to drive it when I get it to my older age, when the other trucks maybe need some work. So I'm just hoping that works out for me, my little plan. But anyway, I'll be working on this probably tomorrow now, so I'm not going to be doing nothing else with it tonight. I took that cover off over there, and that's it for now. I got to clean up a little bit and put things in order so Bullseye don't drag them all over the place for me. Have a good one, guys. Hey YouTube. So what you're looking at here, this area here represents the drawing symbols for dirt. Now this up in here, which right is here, is stone, and then this represents insulation. So now this doesn't show the insulation coming down here and meeting this, but that's what it did do. And then like I said, we would put insulation in the front of this concrete to seal that. But I had been asked a couple of questions and I want to answer them. This is the concrete. This little triangle and the specks you see there represent concrete. Now there is, for some people call it visqueen, some people call it plastic, but 6mm plastic runs here, down, and to the form board. Okay, and the form board would actually be right, let's see here, right here is where the form board would be. So this is all concrete in here. Now, if you remember, I had said that down in the foundation where the concrete is, in the foundation wall, I also had rebar. Now this rebar doesn't show it, but this actually extended down and was driven into the ground to help hold it there. And then these bars were tied horizontally across from one bar linking to the other. That's what you're seeing there with this small bar. So what I did with these is I left these stick up far enough so that they could be bent and hit the 10 gauge mesh, which is right here, and then this mesh was welded to these rebar, or you can tie the mesh to it. It doesn't really matter. I welded it because I was doing some welding that day for something and I had the welder on the truck, so I just used it. Also, this represents the anchor bolts. After you pour the concrete, you can put the anchor bolts in, and you want to measure and try and get the anchor bolts so they're not going to be in the center of studs or window jacks when you go to put the anchor bolts in, or in door jambs. You don't want that. But anyway, this would represent the anchor bolt. So the insulation would come over, down. There would be plastic on top of the insulation, okay, and then you pour the concrete. And it's important that this mesh come across this gap here. This concrete is weakest right at this point here, okay, and if you don't have a good compacted fill underneath that and compacted stone, you could end up with a crack here. Now I have never had any cracks in the floor along this edge, and that's mainly because it's been compacted so hard. Because once you compact this soil and you dig this up here, the only place you may have a little bit of breakout is, you know, with the soil is right in these corners as you're pulling the bucket out with, loaded with dirt. So the best thing to do is to dig the trench for the foundation. That would be this section here. Pour that entire thing with the rebar in it, and leave the rebar long, like maybe 2.5 feet long, so that you can bend it and stretch it to reach the 10 gauge mesh, and that'll hold this thing together for you. You could bring this rebar, if you wanted to, way out into here. That's up to you. It would work out good to be able to do that, so that's not really an issue. Yeah, so there is crushed stone under there. That was one of the questions, and it depends on how much. If the dirt that you're using, let's say the dirt you're using is something like maybe like a sandy clay that's dry enough to get good compaction, you can get it pretty flat. But if you're using something like shale or a bonier material, meaning that there's bigger rocks in it, you might not be able to get it nice and flat without rolling it with something or hitting it with a good plate tamper is not hard enough to compact that. I would use a jumping jack or a roller. Actually get a small roller in there. But either way, you want to try and get this looking like where the concrete's going to be. So whatever the shape, this should be nice and level. When you lay the insulation down on top of it, it should be laying pretty much flat and touching all the way along here. So anyway, I think that answers the questions that I was asked the other day about this particular design here. I like this design. This design works well. This was from an actual drawing that I This was from an actual drawing that I had gotten approved. And you can see that the elevation of the floor here is at 221750. So that's how I go figuring all that out. 5/8 inch anchor bolts, 5 foot on center. These are 8 inches long. Now you can put any length you want in there. You can put a longer length in there if you're worried about tear out, but on a house you don't really have that problem. Now I invented if you know anything about framing around concrete, if you put the anchor bolts in first and then you have to stand the wall on top of the anchor bolts, that can be troublesome, especially if you have only a couple of carpenters and you're trying to pick these walls up and they have the sheathing and everything on them. It can be very tough. So what I do is I invented a hinge that actually lays flat in the concrete. It goes into the concrete on an angle, like say right here. It goes into the concrete. I'll draw this for you. It goes into the concrete on an angle. Therefore, it has a good amount of bearing, and then it lays flat. Let me just draw this in here. It lays flat along here, and there's a hinge pin in it, so that when you finish the concrete with something like a power trowel, all you have to do is power trowel right over top of this plate. It's not that thick. It's about the same thickness of a bracket, like a hurricane bracket. So then when the concrete's hard and you strip the form off, you just take this and bend it up and around the plate of your framework. Sometime I'll show you that in a different way, because it really works good. It's just as tight as the anchor bolts can be, because you're bending it down to pull the board down, and then you nail it in place. I like it, and it works good, especially for this area. Now I don't know if it would conform to something in a very, very high wind area, but it worked for me. And I built my garage with this thing. That's when I first invented that. But I'll show that to you sometime later. The other question I was asked, let's see if we can get another drawing here, a new drawing. The other question I was asked was let me just go back here a second. Okay, so the other question I was asked is, can you put insulation under a slab that is actually poured on grade? Now, this is where you don't have a problem with frost, okay? So let's say you graded that off a little bit and you're going to build yourself a shed or a garage or whatever you want to on this. It's hard drawing with one finger or one hand. But anyway, yes, you can put insulation under this. In fact, I've done this in my greenhouse. So what I did was I graded the ground level off, okay, and then I took and I put insulation underneath here. Now it just so happens that I did again the entire floor, okay, is insulated. So then when I put the walls up, now in the garage you can still see there's some concrete here. I don't have the vinyl and insulation on the edge, on the greenhouse I mean. Not the garage, the greenhouse. And the greenhouse gets so hot in there, and it's not where you need to heat it in the winter. We're trying to retain heat in the summer. That the concrete slab does that. But if I hadn't insulated this, it would always get cooler every night and lose a lot of heat through the floor and as well as out through the sides and stuff here. So putting insulation underneath the floor after you form it out is a good idea. And I would also put plastic underneath that. It'll help to keep moisture coming through the concrete which depending upon where you're at, you know, you can end up getting the concrete will split once there's moisture in it. It could crack in the wintertime. Now this is something that I don't normally do up in Pennsylvania. However, let me just say this. I found out that just like with my sawmill, you can pour a 24-inch long, a 24-foot long slab, and as long as you make it 6 inches thick and you don't go any wider than about 12 or 16 feet wide. So in other words, what I'm saying here is it's, you know, you're pouring a slab. As long as it's 24 here and not more than 16 there, with 10 gauge mesh, maybe a little rebar thrown in for extra, you know, credit, and then the insulation underneath that, this thing will not crack. My greenhouse has no cracks on the floor whatsoever, and what that is that's known as a floating slab. So one of the commenters had said a raft slab, and I'm assuming that he meant a floating slab. I've never heard the term raft before, but that doesn't, you know, matter. I'm just saying I think that this is what he was talking about. So yeah, you can build that, and then what you would do is you'd you know, go ahead and put your anchor bolts inside here. Oh, I'm grabbing the wrong things here. You'd put your anchor bolts inside here, and go ahead and build your walls however you want to. So there's not a lot to this. This is probably the absolute cheapest way to go. But even with this, you should still spend money on stone and put stone underneath here. Okay? Now the stone that should be underneath here is different than the stone that's underneath the house floor. Because this is a floating slab and it's going to be moving. Now it's not going to move like, you know, all over the place, but it will move. Because this is a floating slab, what you're going to want to do is keep water from being underneath there. So you want to put 2B stone in there, or a stone that, you know, has a, it can be washed stone, but just so that it's clean stone, that there's no dirt in between the stone. Okay, it's just clean stone. And then you grade that off as best you can. I found that if you use this type of stone, this stone will not freeze. Okay, as long as you have it a little high, just like this is showing you, we're a little bit high here from ground level, the water will run off. This will not freeze in here, and then the slab won't crack. It won't heave in any one particular spot. So that's something you want to watch out for. But when you're pouring and setting this onto a concrete foundation, you want more, the better stone for underneath there would either be 1B or screenings, or I wouldn't use sand. I don't like sand, but 2A modified, which is a stone with dirt in it. In other words, the stone has the crushings of the limestone mixed in with it, and that makes for a very hard surface, and it gives you a lot of bearing. In other words, like here where you're, you know, above one stone or the other, you don't get quite the same bearing, especially once you put the insulation over that, because the concrete does not conform to the stone now, it's conforming to the insulation. So the weight of this may give you, you know, you're pushing on some of these sharp edges, which is going to go into the insulation. But you could cap this. You could put 2B stone underneath, 4 inches thick, and then cap this with lighter screenings or something to get a nice smooth finish. The important thing with concrete is to have a nice smooth finish underneath the concrete work. Now, this may sound like it's going a little bit too far with the finish and having the subgrade look the same as the finished product. If you don't want to do it, then don't do it. But I'm telling you from my experience that the more you make this subgrade look like this finish, the better off you're going to be, because you're going to get more support, less cracking, if any, and it's going to just be a better job. So that's my advice, but you don't have to take it naturally. Do what you want. I'm just saying that's one thing that I do. So I'm going to go over some of these other building things that I have and show you some of the stuff that I've come up with over the years to make these things really work nice and make it easy for one person or two people to do these jobs without killing yourself. You know, when I had crews of guys working, it was different than when you're trying to work by yourself. Finishing off a concrete slab that's you know, 12 by 12 when you're 65 years old or 64 years old can be very hard on you, especially if you want it to be nice. Alright guys, that's it for today's video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again tomorrow sometime.